She was innocent and shaking, but that night he held her like she was his whole world. Hello, let's hear another incredible story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I love narrating stories for you, so get ready. Let's start. The October rain drummed against the windows of Juniper's tiny dorm room like an anxious heartbeat, each droplet carrying the weight of autumn's melancholy. At 20 years old, Juniper June, Ellison had grown accustomed to the sound of storms, both the ones outside her window and the ones that had shaped her life since childhood. She sat cross-legged on her narrow bed, surrounded by art supplies that cost more than most students spent on textbooks. Her latest painting dominated the easel before her, a vibrant landscape of the rural Georgia town where she'd grown up, where red clay roads stretched endlessly toward horizons painted in hope. The canvas captured the essence of home, warm, humble, and filled with the kind of love that money couldn't buy. "You're painting that place again," observed Sage Chen, her roommate and closest friend at Boston University. Sage lounged in her desk chair, textbooks scattered around her like fallen leaves. "Missing Grandma Ruby?" Juniper's brush paused mid-stroke, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Always," she admitted, her southern accent still evident despite 2 years in Boston. "Called her this morning. She's doing better, but the medical bills—" She trailed off, not wanting to burden Sage with worries that kept her awake most nights. The truth was, Juniper carried the weight of 2 worlds on her shoulders. Here at BU, she was a scholarship student studying fine arts, surrounded by classmates who spoke casually about summer homes in the Hamptons and spring breaks in Europe. But back home in Georgia, she was Ruby Ellison's granddaughter, the girl who'd lost her parents in a car accident when she was 8 and had been raised by a woman who cleaned houses and took in sewing to make ends meet. "June," Sage said gently, recognizing the distant look in her friend's dark eyes. "You know you don't have to carry everything alone, right?" Juniper set down her brush and finally looked at her friend. Really looked at her. Sage had been her anchor since freshman year, the first person to see past her shyness and recognize the fire that burned quietly within her. Where Juniper was reserved and cautious, Sage was bold and outspoken, balancing her friend's gentle nature with fierce loyalty. "I got a job," Juniper announced suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess herself. "Cleaning houses on weekends. The agency said it pays really well, and I can work around my class schedule." Sage's eyebrows shot up. "June, you're already working at the campus library 20 hours a week, plus carrying a full course load. When are you supposed to sleep, or eat, or have any semblance of a social life?" Juniper laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Social life is a luxury I can't afford right now." She gestured toward her phone, where a text from her grandmother glowed on the screen. Ruby had tried to hide it, but Juniper could read between the lines. The doctor bills were piling up, and her grandmother's pride wouldn't let her ask for help directly. "No, the job is in Beacon Hill," Juniper continued, focusing on mixing colors on her palette to avoid Sage's concerned gaze. "Some wealthy family needs weekend cleaning. The pay is substantial." What she didn't mention was how her hands had trembled when she'd called the agency, how her voice had caught when they'd told her the address. Beacon Hill, where Boston's elite lived in their historic mansions, where the cobblestone streets seemed to whisper secrets of old money and older traditions. It was a world so far removed from her grandmother's modest house in Georgia that it might as well have been another planet. "Which family?" Sage asked, her journalism major instincts kicking in. "The Prescotts," Juniper murmured, finally meeting her friend's eyes. "Do you know them?" Sage's expression shifted, a mixture of surprise and concern flickering across her features. "June, the Prescotts are Boston royalty. Old money. Powerful connections, the kind of family that gets their names on hospital wings and university buildings. Are you sure about this?" Juniper's grip tightened on her paintbrush. She thought about her grandmother's voice on the phone that morning, cheerful as always, but strained around the edges. Ruby Ellison had sacrificed everything to raise her granddaughter, working multiple jobs to ensure Juniper could pursue her dreams. Now it was Juniper's turn to sacrifice. "I'm sure," she said firmly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "It's just cleaning, Sage. I'll be invisible to them." Outside, the rain intensified, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled like a warning. Juniper turned back to her painting, adding deeper shadows to the red clay roads of home. She couldn't know that in just 3 days she would meet someone who would change everything, someone who would see her not as invisible, but as the most radiant person in any room. She couldn't know that love would find her in the most unexpected place, or that it would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and the world she inhabited. All she knew was that she needed to be strong, for Ruby, for her dreams, and for the uncertain future that stretched ahead like an unfinished canvas. As she painted, Juniper whispered a prayer her grandmother had taught her years ago. "Lord, give me strength for today and hope for tomorrow." She had no idea how much she would need both. The cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill gleamed like polished jewels in the early Saturday morning light, still damp from the previous night's rain. Juniper stood at the wrought-iron gates of 247 Chestnut Street, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp October air as she stared up at the Prescott mansion. The Georgian-style estate rose before her like something from a fairy tale. Red brick walls adorned with climbing ivy, tall windows that caught the morning sun like golden eyes, and a front door painted the deep blue of midnight skies. Everything about it whispered old money, established power, and a world so removed from her own that she felt like an intruder before she'd even stepped inside. "You can do this, June," she whispered to herself, clutching the brass key the cleaning agency had given her. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "Baby girl, dignity isn't about where you come from or what work you do. It's about how you carry yourself through it all." The key turned smoothly in the service entrance, and Juniper stepped into a mudroom that was larger than her entire dorm room. Marble floors, hand-carved wooden benches, and oil paintings that probably cost more than Ruby's annual income adorned the space. Even the air smelled expensive, a mixture of fresh flowers, leather, and something indefinably luxurious. Mrs. Whitmore, the head housekeeper, appeared as if summoned by magic. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in an impeccable bun and eyes that missed nothing. Despite her stern appearance, Juniper detected kindness in the way she smiled. "Miss Ellison, I presume." Mrs. Whitmore's British accent was crisp but warm. "Welcome to the Prescott residence. I trust the agency explained your duties." "Yes, ma'am," Juniper replied, her southern manners automatic. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." Mrs. Whitmore's expression softened slightly at Juniper's politeness. "The family is away for the weekend, as they usually are. Mr. and Mrs. Prescott are in Martha's Vineyard, and Master Evander—" She paused, a small frown crossing her features. "Well, he keeps his own schedule. You're unlikely to encounter any of them during your shifts." As they walked through the mansion, Juniper tried to contain her awe. Each room was a masterpiece of design and history, antique furniture that belonged in museums, Persian rugs that told stories of distant lands, and artwork that made her artist's heart sing with appreciation and envy. The library particularly took her breath away, with its floor-to-ceiling shelves, rolling ladders, and reading nooks bathed in natural light. "The family values their privacy above all else," Mrs. Whitmore continued, her tone carrying a subtle warning. "That discretion is paramount in this household. What you see and hear within these walls stays within these walls." "Of course," Juniper nodded, understanding the unspoken implications. She was here to clean, not to gossip or intrude. Mrs. Whitmore handed her a detailed schedule and a set of supplies. "You'll focus primarily on the main living areas, the library, drawing room, and dining room. The family quarters are off-limits unless specifically requested. Any questions?" "No, ma'am. I understand perfectly." Left alone with her thoughts and her work, Juniper found herself settling into a rhythm. She dusted each surface with the reverence of someone who appreciated beautiful things, even if she couldn't own them. In the library, she carefully cleaned around first edition books and priceless artifacts, her fingers occasionally tracing the spines of volumes she'd only dreamed of reading. As she worked, she imagined the stories these walls could tell. Generations of Prescotts had lived here, shaped decisions that affected countless lives, built empires from within these very rooms. What would it be like to grow up with such privilege? To never worry about medical bills or whether you could afford art supplies? The questions made her chest tight with a mixture of longing and shame. She wasn't envious of their wealth, not exactly. But she couldn't help wondering what it would feel like to have choices, to pursue her art without the constant weight of financial pressure. By late afternoon, exhaustion crept into her bones, but she pushed through. Each paycheck from this job brought her one step closer to securing her grandmother's comfort and her own future. She was carefully arranging books in the library when she heard it. The sound of a car door slamming in the distance, followed by footsteps on gravel. Juniper froze, her heart hammering. Mrs. Whitmore had said the family would be away all weekend. She glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner, 6:47 p.m., almost finished for the day. The footsteps grew closer, and she heard the front door open with a decisive thud. Heavy, confident strides echoed through the marble foyer, accompanied by what sounded like cursing. "Damn it!" came a deep male voice, refined but edged with pain and frustration. Juniper's breath caught in her throat. Someone was home, and from the sound of things, they weren't happy. She considered hiding, but where could she go? Her cleaning supplies were scattered around the library, and she couldn't just abandon them. The footsteps were getting closer now, heading toward the very room where she stood, frozen like a deer in headlights. Her mind raced through her options, but there was nowhere to run. That's when she heard it, a sharp intake of breath, followed by a muttered, "Perfect, just perfect." And that's when Juniper Ellison's carefully ordered world began to crumble and reshape itself in ways she never could have imagined. Time seemed to suspend itself in that crystalline moment before everything changed forever. Juniper stood motionless in the center of the library, her heart thundering so loudly she was certain it could be heard throughout the mansion. The footsteps had stopped just outside the door, and she could hear the soft sound of someone leaning against the doorframe. "Hello?" The voice was deeper now, closer, tinged with exhaustion, and something that sounded almost vulnerable. "I know someone's in here. Mrs. Whitmore's car isn't in the drive, so—" Juniper took a shaky breath and stepped forward, her cleaning rag still clutched in her trembling hands. I'm sorry, sir. I'm Juniper from the cleaning service. I was just finishing up." The man who appeared in the doorway made her breath catch in her throat and her world tilt on its axis. Even disheveled and clearly in pain, Evander Prescott was devastatingly handsome in a way that seemed almost unfair. Dark hair fell across his forehead in waves that caught the lamplight, and his eyes, God, his eyes, were the color of storm clouds, deep gray with flecks of silver that seemed to see straight through her. But it was the vulnerability in those eyes that undid her completely. This wasn't the arrogant playboy she'd expected from Sage's descriptions. This was a man who looked lost, hurt, and utterly human. "You're bleeding," she said softly, noticing the dark stains spreading across his white dress shirt sleeve. Evander glanced down at his arm as if he'd forgotten about the injury. "Car accident, minor fender bender, but a piece of metal caught me." He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Evander, by the way, and you don't need to call me sir." Something about the way he said it, not condescending or dismissive, but genuinely kind, made Juniper's chest warm in a way she'd never experienced. Have you seen a doctor?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "For this little scratch, I don't think so." His pride was evident, even through his exhaustion. "And I can handle it myself." Juniper watched as he moved toward the leather chair by the fireplace, favoring his injured arm. Every instinct her grandmother had instilled in her, to help, to heal, to care, overrode her nervousness about being alone with him. "No, you can't," she said firmly, surprising them both with her boldness. "And that needs to be cleaned properly, or it could get infected." Evander turned to look at her fully for the first time, and the intensity of his gaze made her feel exposed in the most beautiful way. She was acutely aware of everything about herself: her simple jeans and BU sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, her paint-stained fingers. But instead of judgment in his eyes, she saw something that made her pulse race: genuine interest. "You'd do that?" he asked quietly. "Help me?" "Of course," she replied, as if there had never been any other option. 20 minutes later, Juniper found herself in the mansion's opulent bathroom, carefully cleaning Evander's wound while he sat on the marble counter. The first aid supplies had been surprisingly easy to find. Mrs. Whitmore ran an efficient household. "You're good at this," Evander murmured, his voice softer now, more intimate in the quiet space. "Are you studying medicine?" "Fine arts," Juniper replied, focusing intently on his wound to avoid those mesmerizing eyes. "But my grandmother taught me basic first aid. She always said you never know when someone might need help." "She sounds like a wise woman." "She is." Juniper's voice caught slightly with emotion. "She raised me after my parents died. She's everything to me." When she finally looked up, she found Evander studying her with an expression so tender it took her breath away. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "losing your parents so young. That must have been incredibly difficult." The genuine compassion in his voice nearly broke her composure. She was used to people either pitying her or dismissing her story entirely, but Evander seemed to truly see her pain and honor it. "It was," she admitted, her hands stilling on the bandage she was applying. "But Ruby, my grandmother, she made sure I knew I was loved. She sacrificed everything so I could be here, studying art. And here you are, taking care of a stranger instead of focusing on your dreams." Their eyes met and held, and something electric passed between them. Juniper felt as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, wind whipping through her hair, deciding whether to take the leap. "You're not a stranger," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Evander's breath hitched, and slowly, carefully, as if she were made of spun glass, he reached up to cup her cheek with his uninjured hand. His thumb traced along her cheekbone with reverent gentleness. "June," he murmured, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. She should step away. She should finish bandaging his arm and leave immediately. She should remember that he was Evander Prescott, heir to a fortune, and she was just the girl who cleaned his house. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed as warmth spread through her entire body. "I've never felt anything like this," she admitted in a whisper so soft he had to lean closer to hear her. "Neither have I," he confessed, and the honesty in his voice made her open her eyes. "June, Whatever he was about to say was lost when she moved closer, drawn to him like a moth to flame. His other hand found her waist, and she could feel his heart racing beneath her palm where it rested on his chest. We shouldn't," she breathed, even as her body betrayed her words by moving closer still. "No, we shouldn't," he agreed, his forehead resting against hers. "This is insane. You work for my family. I barely know you. This could complicate everything." "Then why does it feel so right?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Evander's answer was to close the distance between them, capturing her lips in a kiss, so gentle, so perfect, that it rewrote every definition of love she'd ever known. It was her first real kiss, and it was everything she'd dreamed of, and nothing she could have prepared for. Time stopped, the world disappeared, and there was only this moment, this man, this feeling of coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Evander rested his forehead against hers again. "Everything just changed, didn't it?" he whispered. Juniper nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Neither of them knew that this single moment had set in motion events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, family, and the courage required to choose happiness over security. All they knew was that nothing would ever be the same. The grandfather clock in the library chimed 9 times, each resonant note seeming to echo the rhythm of Juniper's racing heart. She and Evander had moved to the leather sofa near the fireplace, where flames danced and cast golden shadows across their faces. The space between them was charged with an electricity that made the air itself seem alive. Tell me about your art," Evander said softly, his injured arm now properly bandaged, his storm-grey eyes never leaving her face. He had rolled up his sleeves, and Juniper found herself mesmerized by the strong lines of his forearms, the way his hands moved as he spoke. It's hard to explain," she began, tucking her legs beneath her on the sofa. The nervousness she'd felt earlier had transformed into something deeper, more intimate. "When I paint, it's like I'm trying to capture feelings that don't have words, the way sunlight looks when it hits red Georgia clay, or how my grandmother's laugh sounds when she thinks no one is listening." Evander leaned forward, genuinely captivated. "I'd love to see your work sometime." The suggestion hung in the air between them, loaded with implications they both understood. Sometime implied a future, more meetings, a connection that extended beyond this unexpected encounter. "You would!" Juniper's voice was barely above a whisper. "Most people think art is frivolous, especially when you come from where I come from." "Where you come from," Evander repeated thoughtfully, "shaped you into someone extraordinary. I can see it in the way you move, the way you cared for my wound without a second thought, the way you talk about your grandmother." He paused, his hand moving instinctively toward hers before stopping himself. "Can I ask you something personal?" Juniper nodded, her heart fluttering at the almost touch. "What made you take this job? Cleaning houses? I mean, you're clearly intelligent, talented." The question she'd been dreading hung between them. Juniper felt her cheeks warm, with a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. This was the moment where the fantasy would end, where he would remember exactly who she was and why she was here. "Money," she said simply, lifting her chin with quiet dignity. "My grandmother needs medical care, and my scholarship covers tuition, but not much else. I need art supplies, living expenses." She trailed off, watching his face for signs of judgment or pity. Instead, she saw something that made her breath catch: respect. "Ruby raised a remarkable granddaughter," he said quietly. "I can see where you get your strength." The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her. "You don't think less of me for being here, cleaning your house." Evander's expression grew serious, and he finally closed the distance between them, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, calloused in surprising places, evidence that despite his privileged background, he wasn't afraid of hard work. "June, listen to me," he said urgently. "What you do to take care of the people you love doesn't define your worth. It reveals your character, and your character is—" He struggled for words, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "You're extraordinary." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but they were good tears, tears of relief and something dangerously close to hope. "Tell me about you," she said, needing to shift the focus away from the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "What's it like being Evander Prescott?" Something flickered across his face, a shadow that darkened his storm-grey eyes. "Lonely," he admitted with startling honesty. "People see the name, the money, the expectations. They see what they want to see. What do they miss?" Evander was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on their joined hands. "That sometimes I lie awake at night, wondering if anyone would care about me if I lost it all tomorrow. That I've spent my whole life trying to live up to a legacy that feels like a prison sometimes." He looked up at her, vulnerability naked in his expression. "And that I've never had anyone look at me the way you're looking at me right now." "How am I looking at you?" Juniper asked softly. "Like you see me, really see me. Not the heir, not the trust fund, not the reputation, just me." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Juniper felt something shift in her chest, a recognition so profound it made her dizzy. This beautiful, complicated man was as lost as she was, just in a different way. "And I do see you," she whispered. "I see someone who came home hurt and let a stranger take care of him. Someone who asks about my art like it matters. Someone who—" She hesitated, then took a breath and plunged forward. "Someone who makes me feel brave. Brave. I've spent my whole life trying to be invisible, especially around people like—" She gestured vaguely at the opulent room around them. "People from your world. But with you, I don't want to hide." Evander's free hand came up to cup her cheek, just as he had in the bathroom. "God, June, what are you doing to me?" Before she could answer, he leaned forward and kissed her again. This time, there was less hesitation, more hunger. Juniper felt herself melting into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as every nerve ending in her body came alive. The kiss deepened, and she could taste the desperation on his lips, the same desperate need she felt to somehow get closer, to merge their souls as completely as their mouths. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Evander rested his forehead against hers. "This is insane," he murmured, but his arms tightened around her. "Completely," she agreed, but made no move to pull away. "My family would have a stroke if they knew I was here with you." "Mine would probably faint," Juniper laughed shakily. "We barely know each other." "I know enough," she said firmly. "I know you're kind. I know you're lonely. I know you make me feel things I've never felt before." June. Her name was a prayer, a question, a confession all at once. "I know this is crazy," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "But I know we're from completely different worlds. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this could never work. But," she pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, "but I've spent my whole life playing it safe, doing what was expected, trying not to want too much." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't want to be safe with you, Evander. I want to be reckless. I want to be brave. I want to see what happens if I stop being afraid." The silence that followed was filled with the crackling of the fire and the sound of two hearts learning to beat in sync. Outside, the October wind picked up, rattling the windows like a reminder of the storm brewing in both their lives. "What happens now?" Evander asked finally. Juniper smiled, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly fearless. "And now we find out if lightning can strike twice in the same place." As if summoned by her words, thunder rumbled in the distance, and both of them knew that whatever came next, there would be no going back to who they were before this night. The girl who cleaned houses and the heir to a fortune had found something neither had been looking for, a love that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and the world around them. Dawn crept through the library windows like a guilty secret, painting everything in soft gold and rose. Juniper stirred slowly, awareness returning in fragments, the warmth of cashmere against her cheek, the steady rhythm of breathing that wasn't her own, the masculine scent that had somehow become home overnight. She was curled against Evander's chest on the leather sofa, his arms wrapped protectively around her. They were both fully clothed, but the intimacy of their position felt more profound than anything physical could have been. Sometime during the night, he had pulled a throw blanket over them both, and now his chin rested atop her head, his breathing deep and peaceful. For a moment, Juniper allowed herself to exist in this perfect bubble where the outside world didn't matter, where she was just a girl who had fallen for an extraordinary man, and he was just someone who saw her for who she truly was. But reality has a way of creeping in, especially when that reality included cleaning supplies scattered around the room and the knowledge that she was supposed to have left hours ago. "Good morning." Evander's voice was rough with sleep, vibrating through his chest beneath her ear. Juniper tilted her head up to find him already watching her, those storm-grey eyes, soft in the morning light. His dark hair was mussed, and there was something so intimate about seeing him disheveled that her heart did a little flip in her chest. "I should go," she whispered, but made no move to leave his arms. "Should you?" His hand found her hair, fingers threading through the strands that had escaped her ponytail. "It's Sunday. You don't have classes. "I have work at the library this afternoon," she said, though the excuse felt weak even to her own ears. "What if I asked you to stay?" The question was quiet, almost vulnerable. "What if I said I made breakfast reservations at that little cafe on Newbury Street, and I'd very much like to take you there?" Juniper's heart raced at the implication. A public date, being seen together, the first step into a world where their connection wasn't hidden away in the safety of his family's library. "Evander," she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice her fears. "What is it?" He shifted so he could see her face better, his expression growing concerned. "June, talk to me. What are we doing?" The words tumbled out in a rush. "Last night was incredible, perfect, but in the daylight, everything feels more complicated." Evander was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing along her cheekbone in a gesture that was becoming familiar. "Are you regretting it?" "No," she said immediately, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I could never regret last night, but I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of wanting something I can't have, of getting my heart broken, of you realizing that a girl who cleans houses doesn't belong in your world." Evander sat up abruptly, bringing her with him so she was facing him directly. His hands framed her face, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice low and urgent. "What you do for work has nothing to do with who you are. You're brilliant, talented, compassionate, and strong. Any world that doesn't see that isn't worth belonging to." Tears pricked at Juniper's eyes, but she blinked them back. "It's not that simple, Evander. Your family, your friends, your business associates, they'll never accept me." "Then I'll find new friends and different business associates," he said without hesitation. "As for my family," his jaw tightened slightly, "they'll learn to accept you, or they'll learn to live without me." The fierce protectiveness in his voice both thrilled and terrified her. "You can't just cut yourself off from your entire life for someone you met yesterday." "Can't I?" He leaned closer, his forehead touching hers. "June, I've spent 24 years surrounded by people who only care about what I can do for them. Money, connections, status. That's all anyone sees when they look at me. But you see something different, don't you? I see someone who's been carrying the weight of other people's expectations for so long that he's forgotten what he actually wants," she said softly. "And what do I want?" he asked, though the answer was already in his eyes. "To be seen, to be chosen for who you are, not what you represent, to matter to someone in a way that has nothing to do with your bank account or your last name." "Yes," he breathed, "all of that. And I want it with you." Before Juniper could respond, the sound of a car door slamming echoed from the driveway. They both froze, the spell of their morning intimacy broken by the harsh intrusion of reality. "Damn," Evander muttered, immediately moving to the window. "It's Mrs. Whitmore. She wasn't supposed to be back until this evening." Panic fluttered in Juniper's chest. "I need to leave. Now. June, wait." But she was already gathering her cleaning supplies with practiced efficiency, her mind racing. Being caught here like this, wrapped in Evander's arms on the sofa, would be a disaster. Mrs. Whitmore had been kind to her, but she was still an employee of the Prescott family, first and foremost. "The service entrance," Evander said quickly, understanding her urgency. "I'll walk you out." They moved swiftly through the mansion, but just as they reached the mudroom, they heard Mrs. Whitmore's key in the front door. Juniper's heart hammered against her ribs as Evander grabbed her hand, his touch warm and reassuring even in their panic. "This doesn't change anything," he said urgently, his voice low. "Last night, this morning, none of it was a mistake." "Evander, give me your phone number," he interrupted. Please." Against her better judgment, Juniper quickly typed her number into his phone, just as Mrs. Whitmore's voice echoed from the foyer, calling out a greeting that suggested she expected a response. "I have to go," Juniper whispered. "I'll call you," Evander promised, squeezing her hand. "Tonight. We're not done, June. We're just getting started." She wanted to believe him, but as she slipped out the service entrance and hurried toward the street, doubt crept in with each step. The morning air was crisp against her skin, a sharp contrast to the warmth of Evander's arms, and the outside world felt harsh and unforgiving after the sanctuary of the library. By the time she reached the tea station, Juniper's phone was already buzzing with a text message. "Thank you for last night, for seeing me, for letting me see you. This isn't over, beautiful." Despite everything, her fears, her doubts, the impossibility of their situation, Juniper found herself smiling as she read his words. Whatever happened next, she had been brave. She had chosen to feel, to want, to hope. And for the first time in her life, someone was choosing her back. But as the train carried her back to her dorm room and her real life, Juniper couldn't shake the feeling that their perfect bubble was about to burst. The morning after, everything felt like the calm before the storm, and she could already hear thunder rumbling in the distance. Some love stories begin with a whisper, but theirs had started with lightning. The question now was whether they could weather the storm that was sure to follow. As Boston blurred past the train window, Juniper closed her eyes and held on to the memory of Evander's arms around her, his promise echoing in her mind. "We're just getting started." She only hoped they would have the chance to finish what they'd begun. Monday morning arrived with the brutal efficiency of reality crashing back into Juniper's life. She sat in her advanced color theory class, staring blankly at Professor Williams as he discussed the emotional psychology of warm versus cool palettes. But her mind was elsewhere, specifically wrapped around the memory of storm-grey eyes and the feeling of being truly seen for the first time in her life. Her phone buzzed discreetly in her lap, and her heart skipped when she saw Evander's name on the screen. "Good morning, beautiful. Can't stop thinking about you. Coffee after your classes. I know a quiet place." Before she could respond, Sage slid into the seat beside her, 20 minutes late and carrying 2 coffee cups from their usual campus cafe. Sorry, Sage whispered, handing Juniper one of the cups. "Overslept after staying up all night working on that investigative piece about—" She paused, noticing Juniper's distracted expression and the phone clutched in her hands. "Earth to June. You look like you've seen a ghost, or won the lottery, or both." Juniper quickly tucked her phone away, heat rising in her cheeks. "Just tired. Long weekend." "Right," Sage said slowly, her journalist instincts clearly pinging. "How was the Prescott mansion?" "As pretentious as I imagined." The innocent question hit Juniper like a physical blow. How could she explain that the Prescott mansion had become the place where her entire world had shifted on its axis? That she'd spent Saturday night discovering what it felt like to be cherished by someone extraordinary. "It was fine," she managed, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Sage's eyes narrowed slightly, but Professor Williams shot them a warning look, so the interrogation was temporarily postponed. 20 minutes later, as they walked across campus toward their next classes, Sage's questions resumed with renewed intensity. Okay, spill," she demanded, pulling Juniper aside near the student center. "You've been glowing like you stuck your finger in an electrical socket, and you keep checking your phone every 30 seconds. What happened at that house?" Juniper felt the weight of her secret pressing against her chest like a physical thing. Part of her desperately wanted to tell Sage everything about Evander's vulnerability, about the way he looked at her like she hung the stars, about how she'd never felt so alive as when she was in his arms. But another part of her, the part that remembered Sage's warnings about the Prescott family, held her back. "Nothing happened," she said, but even to her own ears, the lie sounded hollow. "June." Sage's voice took on the gentle but firm tone she used when she was worried. "We've been friends for 2 years. I know when you're hiding something, and right now, you're practically vibrating with secrets." Before Juniper could respond, her phone rang. Evander's name flashed on the screen, and her heart immediately began racing. She stared at the phone, torn between answering and maintaining the pretense that nothing had changed. "Who is that?" Sage asked, trying to peek at the screen. "Nobody," Juniper said quickly, declining the call. "Just spam." But the damage was done. Sage's expression shifted from curious to concerned, and Juniper knew her friend well enough to recognize that look. It was the same expression Sage got when she was investigating a story and had just uncovered a crucial lead. "June, whatever's going on, you can tell me. You know that, right?" "I know," Juniper said softly, guilt gnawing at her stomach. I need some time to process things." Sage studied her for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but when you're ready to talk, I'm here. And June, be careful. People like the Prescotts, they don't live in the same world as us. They play by different rules." As Sage walked away, her words echoed in Juniper's mind like a warning bell. She thought about Evander's promise that he would choose her over his family's approval, but in the harsh light of day, surrounded by the reality of her college life and her mounting responsibilities, those words felt more like fantasy than promise. Her phone buzzed again with a text. "Everything okay? You seemed upset when you didn't answer." Then, almost immediately, another message. "I know this is complicated, but please don't shut me out. We need to talk." Juniper stared at the messages, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. What could she possibly say? That she was terrified, that the gap between their worlds felt wider in daylight than it had in the intimate darkness of his library, that she was falling for him so hard and so fast that it scared her breathless. Instead, she typed, "Can't talk now. In class all day." His response came back immediately. "Tonight, then. I'll pick you up at 7. Evander, I don't think... Please, June, don't make decisions about us when we're apart. Let me see you." She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the choice before her. She could text him back, make an excuse, try to return to the safety of her old life, where the most complicated relationship she had was with her color palette. Or she could be brave, the way she'd been Saturday night, when she'd chosen to help him, chosen to trust him, chosen to let him kiss her. Where? She typed before she could lose her nerve. "I'll send you an address. Wear something casual. This is crazy," she added, but found herself smiling as she typed it. "The best things usually are. See you tonight, beautiful." As Juniper walked to her next class, she felt as if she were walking a tightrope, stretched between two different lives. On one side was safety, predictability, and the path she'd carefully mapped out for herself. On the other was Evander, with his storm-grey eyes and his promise to choose her, and the terrifying possibility of a love that could either lift her up or destroy everything she'd worked for. But even as fear gnawed at her stomach, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd held her, the way he'd spoken about her grandmother with genuine respect, the way he'd made her feel like she mattered in a way that had nothing to do with her usefulness or her achievements. Meanwhile, across the city in the gleaming offices of Prescott Holdings, Evander sat in a board meeting, trying to focus on quarterly reports, while his mind replayed every moment of Saturday night. He'd never experienced anything like the connection he'd felt with Juniper, the way she'd seen through his carefully constructed facade to the lonely man beneath, the way her touch had felt like coming home. His father, Harrison Prescott, was deep into a presentation about expanding their real estate portfolio when Evander's phone lit up with Juniper's response. The simple word, "where," filled him with more joy than any business deal ever had. "Evander," his father's sharp voice cut through his thoughts. "Perhaps you'd like to share what's so important on your phone." Every head in the boardroom turned toward him, and Evander felt the familiar weight of expectation and judgment that had followed him his entire life. But for the first time, instead of feeling crushed by it, he felt resistant. "Nothing that can't wait," he said calmly, sliding his phone into his pocket. But Harrison's eyes were sharp, calculating. Evander had seen that look before. It was the expression his father wore when he sensed weakness or distraction in a business rival. "Good," Harrison said slowly, "because we need to discuss the Morrison account after this meeting, and the Hendersons' dinner party this Saturday. Louise Henderson's daughter just graduated from Wellesley. Brilliant girl, excellent family connections." The subtext was clear. and it made Evander's jaw clench. His father's matchmaking attempts were nothing new, but now they felt like a direct threat to something precious and new and entirely his own. "I'm busy Saturday," Evander said evenly. "You'll make time," Harrison replied, his tone brooking no argument. "The Hendersons are important allies." As the meeting continued around him, Evander found himself thinking about Juniper's fears, about the way she'd worried that his world would never accept her. Looking around the boardroom at the faces of men who measured worth in stock portfolios and social connections, he began to understand that her fears weren't just anxiety, they were prophecy. The question was he strong enough to choose love over legacy? Only time would tell. But as he typed back his response to Juniper, Evander felt the first stirrings of a rebellion that had been building his entire life. The fault lines in both their worlds were beginning to show, and the earthquake was coming, whether they were ready or not. The address Evander had sent led Juniper to a small, hidden garden tucked behind a brownstone in Back Bay, a secret pocket of peace in the heart of the city. Fairy lights were strung between ancient oak trees, casting everything in a warm, golden glow that made the space feel otherworldly. A picnic blanket was spread beneath the largest tree, surrounded by takeout containers from what looked like several different restaurants. Juniper found Evander sitting on the blanket, still in his work clothes, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. When he saw her approaching, the smile that spread across his face was so genuine, so relieved, that it made her heart skip several beats. "You came," he said softly, standing to greet her. "You doubted I would?" she asked, though they both knew the answer. The uncertainty had been written in his last few text messages, the fear that daylight and reality might have scared her away. Honestly? Yes. His admission was vulnerable, honest. "This morning, when you seemed distant, I thought maybe you'd realize this was all a mistake." Juniper stepped closer, close enough to see the worry lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that spoke of a day spent second-guessing everything. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his cheek, the same gesture he'd used on her so many times. "The only mistake would be walking away," she said quietly. The relief that flooded his expression was immediate and profound. His hand covered hers where it rested against his face, and for a moment they just stood there, grounding themselves in each other's presence. "How did you find this place?" Juniper asked, looking around at the hidden garden that felt like something from a fairy tale. "I used to come here when I was younger," Evander explained, guiding her to the blanket. "And when the pressure at home got too intense, when I needed somewhere to think, it belongs to Mrs. Carmichael. She was my nanny when I was little. She lets me use it whenever I need an escape." The image of a young Evander, overwhelmed and seeking solitude, tugged at Juniper's heart. She settled onto the blanket beside him, accepting the container of Thai food he offered her. "Tell me about your day," he said, his attention focused entirely on her. "I want to know everything. Your classes, your friends, what made you smile, what worried you." So she did. She told him about Professor Williams and color theory, about Sage's suspicious questions, and her own mounting anxiety about keeping their connection secret. She told him about the way other students looked at her sometimes, not unkindly, but with a distance that reminded her she was there on scholarship, that she didn't quite belong. "And what about you?" she asked when she'd finished. "How was your day in the corporate world?" Evander's expression darkened slightly. "Complicated. My father is pressing me about some social obligations. A dinner party this weekend where I'm expected to charm the right people, make the right connections." "That doesn't sound so bad," Juniper said carefully, though something in his tone made her stomach clench. "It would be if it were just business." Evander set down his food, his jaw tightening. "But Harrison Prescott doesn't believe in separating business from personal life. The Henderson daughter will be there, recent Wellesley graduate, impeccable breeding, family fortune to match ours." Understanding hit Juniper like a physical blow. "He wants you to marry her. He wants me to consider her, along with several other suitable candidates. He's been parading in front of me for the past 2 years." Evander's voice was bitter, frustrated. He thinks it's time I settle down with someone who understands our world, someone who can be an asset to the family business. And what do you think? The question came out smaller than Juniper intended. Evander turned to face her fully, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. I think I've already found the person I want to spend my life getting to know, and she's sitting right here, looking at me like I might break her heart. Aren't you going to? The words slipped out before she could stop them, raw and honest and afraid. June? His thumbs traced her cheekbones, and she could see the pain her question caused him. I can't promise this will be easy. I can't promise my family will accept you immediately, or that there won't be people who try to make you feel small, but I can promise that I will fight for you, for us, every single day. What if it's not enough? She whispered. What if the pressure becomes too much? What if you wake up one day and realize that your father is right, that you'd be better off with someone from your own world? Look at me, Evander commanded softly, waiting until her eyes met his. On June, I spent the first 24 years of my life surrounded by people from my world, beautiful, accomplished, well-connected women who said all the right things and wanted all the right things, and I felt nothing, empty. Like I was going through the motions of a life that belonged to someone else. He leaned closer, his forehead touching hers. But with you, everything is different. You challenge me, you see me, you make me want to be the man I actually am, instead of the man everyone expects me to be. You think I'm going to give that up for social approval. Your family's approval isn't just social, Juniper pointed out, though her resolve was weakening with every word he spoke. It's your livelihood, your future, your legacy. Then I'll build a new legacy, he said fiercely. No, with you. The conviction in his voice was overwhelming, intoxicating. Juniper felt herself falling deeper into the impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, love really could conquer all. This is terrifying, she admitted. The best things usually are, he replied, echoing his text from earlier. June, I know I'm asking you to take a leap of faith. I know I'm asking you to trust me with your heart when we've only known each other for 3 days. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. What happens next? She asked, the same question that had haunted her since their first kiss. Next, we stop hiding, Evander said, his voice steady and sure. Next, we figure out how to blend our worlds instead of choosing between them. Next, we fight for what we have. As if to seal his promise, he kissed her under the fairy lights, and Juniper felt every doubt, every fear, every rational objection melt away. This was worth fighting for. He was worth fighting for. They were worth fighting for. But even as she lost herself in his kiss, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that some battles were harder to win than others, and that love, no matter how pure, wasn't always enough to overcome the forces determined to tear it apart. Time would tell which voice was right. For now, under the cover of stars and fairy lights, they had each other, and that felt like enough to move mountains. Harrison Prescott stood in his mahogany-paneled office on the 40th floor of the Prescott Holdings building, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a kingdom he'd conquered through decades of calculated moves and ruthless decisions. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man who had never lost a battle that mattered, until now. The photographs scattered across his desk told a story he hadn't authorized. His son, his heir, his legacy, wrapped in the arms of a girl who cleaned their house. Mrs. Whitmore sat uncomfortably in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, her usually composed demeanor cracked with obvious distress. She'd been with the family for 15 years, had watched Evander grow from a rebellious teenager into the man Harrison had groomed to take over the empire. Her loyalty was absolute, which made her betrayal all the more significant. "You're certain it was him?" Harrison's voice was dangerously calm, the tone that made boardroom adversaries sweat. "Yes, sir." Mrs. Whitmore's British accent was more pronounced when she was nervous. "Master Evander was in the library when I arrived Sunday morning, with the girl, Miss Ellison. They appeared to have spent the night together." Harrison's jaw tightened imperceptibly. And you felt it necessary to have them followed? I felt it necessary to protect the family's interests, Mrs. Whitmore replied, though her discomfort was obvious. When I saw them leaving together Monday evening, when I noticed the way he looked at her, I thought you should know. The private investigator's report made for fascinating reading. Evander and Juniper at the hidden garden behind Mrs. Carmichael's brownstone. Evander picking Juniper up from campus. Long walks through Boston Common, intimate dinners at obscure restaurants where they thought no one would recognize them. 3 weeks of secret meetings, of stolen moments, of his son falling deeper into what could only be described as obsession. 20 years old, Harrison mused, studying the photograph of Juniper laughing at something Evander had said. Art student, scholarship recipient, raised by her grandmother in rural Georgia. He set the photo down with deliberate precision, and she cleans our house on weekends. Sir, I want to clarify that Miss Ellison has always been professional, respectful. I'm sure she has. Harrison's smile was sharp as a blade. I'm sure she's been very accommodating. Mrs. Whitmore flinched at the implication. It's not like that, sir. I've observed them together. The boy is genuinely smitten. The boy, Harrison repeated slowly, is about to inherit a business empire worth $3 billion. His romantic entanglements are not a matter of personal preference. They are strategic decisions that affect thousands of employees, hundreds of business partnerships, and decades of carefully cultivated relationships. He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Cancel his credit cards, all of them. And I want a comprehensive background check on the girl, financial records, academic performance, family history, social media presence, everything. Sir, don't you think that's a bit excessive? Harrison turned back to her, his expression cold. Mrs. Whitmore, do you know what it cost me to clean up Evander's mess when he was expelled from that prep school for fighting? Or when he decided to backpack through Europe instead of attending the Harvard Business School orientation? Or when he publicly criticized our labor practices in that newspaper interview? Mrs. Whitmore remained silent. Millions, Harrison continued. Millions in donations, favors called in, relationships repaired. Because every mistake my son makes reflects on this family, on this business, on everything I've built. His voice grew quieter, more dangerous. I will not allow him to destroy his future, and ours, for some romantic infatuation with the help. Meanwhile, in Juniper's dorm room, Sage paced like a caged animal, while Juniper sat on her bed, finally ready to tell the truth. You're dating Evander Prescott. Sage's voice was flat, disbelieving. Evander Prescott, the heir to a fortune, the guy whose family owns half of Boston. I know how it sounds. Do you? Sage whirled around, her dark eyes flashing with worry and anger. June, do you have any idea what you're walking into? These people eat girls like us for breakfast. He's not like that, Juniper said desperately. Evander is kind and genuine, and he sees me for who I really am. Of course he does, Sage exploded. And you're beautiful, smart, talented, and completely naive about how the world works. You're probably the most real thing that's ever happened to him. But that doesn't mean he's going to choose you when push comes to shove. You don't know him. I know his type, Sage interrupted. Rich boys who rebel against daddy by slumming it with the scholarship kids until it's time to settle down and marry someone appropriate. Then they'll break your heart and marry the debutante their parents picked out. Juniper's phone buzzed with a text from Evander. Can you come over tonight? Something's happened. The urgency in his message made her stomach clench with dread. What is it? Sage asked, noticing her expression. I have to go, Juniper said, grabbing her jacket. June, wait, Sage caught her arm. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to protect you. People like the Prescotts don't just accept outsiders into their world. They destroy them. But Juniper was already heading for the door, her heart pounding with the certainty that whatever was waiting for her at Evander's was going to change everything. She was right. When she arrived at the mansion, using the front door this time, as Evander had insisted, she found him in the library where they'd first met. But this time, he wasn't alone. Harrison Prescott, stood by the fireplace, impeccably dressed and radiating the kind of power that made the air itself feel heavier. His resemblance to Evander was striking, but where Evander's features were softened by kindness and vulnerability, Harrison's were sharp with intelligence and calculation. "Miss Ellison," Harrison said smoothly, his voice cultured and cold. "How delightful to finally meet you properly." Evander moved immediately to her side, his hand finding hers in a gesture that was both protective and defiant. "June, this is my father. Dad, this is Juniper." "Yes," Harrison smiled, and it was perhaps the most terrifying expression Juniper had ever seen. "I know exactly who she is." The way he said it, loaded with implication and threat, made Juniper's blood run cold. Whatever this meeting was about, whatever Harrison Prescott wanted, she had the sinking feeling that her fairy tale was about to become a nightmare. "Shall we sit?" Harrison gestured toward the sitting area with the politeness of a predator inviting its prey to dinner. "Adugi, we have so much to discuss." As they settled into the leather chairs where she and Evander had shared their first real conversation, Juniper realized that some storms announce themselves with thunder and lightning. Others arrive with the quiet smile of a powerful man who's decided you're standing in his way. The reckoning had begun. The silence in the library was suffocating, heavy with unspoken threats and barely contained fury. Harrison Prescott sat with the casual confidence of a man who had never met an opponent he couldn't defeat, while Evander's hand tightened around Juniper's like a lifeline in a storm. "Miss Ellison," Harrison began, his voice deceptively pleasant, "I understand you're studying art at Boston University. Fine arts, isn't it? Such a creative pursuit." The way he said creative made it sound like a disease. Juniper lifted her chin, drawing on every lesson in dignity her grandmother had ever taught her. "Yes, sir, I'm very passionate about my studies." "Passion," Harrison repeated, savoring the word. "How wonderful. Tell me, what are your plans after graduation? Surely someone with your talents has considered the practical aspects of an artistic career." Juniper felt the trap closing around her, but she refused to show weakness. "I plan to teach art while pursuing my own work. There are several programs." "Teaching," Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "A noble profession, poorly paid, of course, but noble nonetheless. And your grandmother, Ruby, isn't it? I understand she's been unwell." The casual mention of her grandmother's name hit Juniper like a physical blow. The message was clear. "I know everything about you. I know how to hurt you." "Dad," Evander's voice was low, dangerous. Don't what?" Harrison's smile was razor-sharp. "I'm simply getting to know the young woman who's captured my son's attention so completely." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila folder, setting it on the coffee table between them with deliberate precision. "Miss Ellison, I had my people compile some information about your financial situation. Fascinating reading." Juniper's blood turned to ice as Harrison opened the folder, revealing bank statements, medical bills, scholarship documents, her entire life reduced to numbers on pages. Grandmother's hospital bills, $47,000 and counting. Your own student loans, $23,000. Monthly expenses. He flipped through the pages with clinical detachment. "You're drowning, aren't you, dear?" "Stop!" Evander stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. This is completely inappropriate." "Sit down, Evander." The command in Harrison's voice was absolute. "You need to hear this." But Evander remained standing, moving to stand behind Juniper's chair, his hands resting protectively on her shoulders. "I know what you're doing, and it won't work." "Do you?" Harrison's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Then you'll be fascinated to know that I've also compiled some projections about Miss Ellison's future. Without significant financial intervention, her grandmother will likely lose her house within 6 months. Miss Ellison herself will graduate with crushing debt and few prospects for meaningful income in her chosen field." Each word was a carefully aimed arrow. designed to wound. Juniper felt herself shrinking under the assault, her dreams and fears laid bare for this man's amusement. However, Harrison continued, his tone shifting to something almost benevolent, I'm not an unreasonable man. I believe in solving problems efficiently. He reached into another folder and withdrew a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table to Juniper. Her hands shook as she picked it up, unable to believe what she was seeing. A check, she whispered, for $100,000. Consider it a scholarship, Harrison said smoothly. Enough to pay off your grandmother's medical bills, your student loans, and provide a comfortable cushion for your future artistic endeavors. All yours, Miss Ellison. No strings attached. No strings attached except leaving your son, Juniper said quietly, finally understanding the game. I didn't say that, Harrison replied, but his smile confirmed her suspicions. I'm simply offering you an opportunity to secure your future. What you choose to do with your personal life is entirely up to you. This is disgusting, Evander snarled, moving around the chair to face his father directly. You can't buy people. Everyone has a price, son. The only question is whether they're honest enough to admit it. Juniper stared at the check, her mind reeling. $100,000. Enough to save Ruby, to secure her own future, to lift the crushing weight of financial worry that had haunted her entire life. All she had to do was walk away from the man she loved. And if I don't take it, she asked, though she dreaded the answer. Harrison's expression grew cold, predatory. Then I'll be forced to take more direct action. Your grandmother's mortgage, for instance. I happen to have some influence with her bank. A single phone call could accelerate the foreclosure process significantly. You bastard! Evander lunged forward, but Harrison didn't even flinch. Or perhaps your scholarship, Harrison continued, as if Evander hadn't spoken. Boston University values its relationship with Prescott Holding. I wonder how they'd feel about a scholarship student who's been engaging in inappropriate relationships with her employer. The threats hung in the air like poison gas, choking the life out of the room. Juniper felt tears burning her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of this man, not when he was already savoring her pain. You're destroying your own son, she said quietly, her voice stronger than she felt. I'm saving him, Harrison replied without hesitation, from a relationship that would ruin his reputation, compromise his business prospects, and ultimately make him miserable. You think love is enough, Miss Ellison. Love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't build empires. Love doesn't secure legacies. Love makes life worth living, Juniper shot back, finding her courage in her anger. But I suppose you wouldn't understand that. For the first time, Harrison's composure cracked slightly. I understand reality, something my son seems to have forgotten. Evander, you're 24 years old. In 6 months, you'll inherit controlling interest in this company. You have responsibilities, obligations. To hell with my obligations, Evander exploded. I love her. Do you hear me? I love her, and I'm not giving her up because you're threatened by someone who sees me as more than a bank account. And what about her obligations? Harrison gestured toward Juniper. To her grandmother? To her future? Are you really so selfish that you'd let the woman you claim to love sacrifice everything for your romantic fantasy? The question hit its mark. Juniper saw the doubt creep into Evander's eyes, the terrible realization that loving her might cost her everything she'd worked for. That's not fair, Evander said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Fair? Harrison laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. Life isn't fair, son. Life is choices and consequences. Miss Ellison can choose financial security and a future free from worry, or she can choose you and watch everything she cares about crumble around her. Juniper looked at the check again, at the numbers that represented salvation and betrayal in equal measure. She thought about Ruby, about the fear in her grandmother's voice when she talked about the medical bills. She thought about her own dreams, about the crushing weight of debt that followed her everywhere. Then she thought about Evander's hands in her hair, about the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, about the promise he'd made to fight for her every single day. Slowly, deliberately, she picked up the check. For a moment, triumph flashed in Harrison's eyes, and devastation crept across Evander's face. Then Juniper tore the check in half, then in half again, and again, until the pieces fell like confetti onto the expensive Persian rug. Keep your money," she said quietly, standing on unsteady legs, "and stay away from my family." Harrison's face darkened with rage. "You're making a mistake that will cost you everything." "Maybe," Juniper replied, looking directly into his cold eyes. "But at least I'll still be able to look at myself in the mirror." She turned to Evander, whose expression was a mixture of awe, love, and terror. "Walk me out." As they left Harrison sitting alone in his poisoned kingdom, Juniper knew that the war was far from over. She'd won this battle, but the enemy was powerful, ruthless, and completely without scruples. The question now was whether love really could conquer all, or whether some prices were simply too high to pay. Outside the mansion, under the same stars that had witnessed their first promises to each other, Juniper and Evander held each other like survivors of a shipwreck, knowing that the worst storms were yet to come. 3 weeks after the confrontation with Harrison Prescott, Juniper's world began to crumble exactly as he had promised. The foreclosure notice arrived on a grey November morning, delivered to Ruby's modest Georgia home with the cold efficiency of corporate machinery. Her scholarship at Boston University was under review due to concerns about conduct. The part-time cleaning jobs that had sustained her dried up overnight, companies citing budget constraints and restructuring. Juniper sat in her dorm room, staring at her phone, where 17 missed calls from her grandmother waited like accusations. She hadn't been able to bring herself to listen to the voicemails, knowing they would contain the confused hurt of a woman who had sacrificed everything for her granddaughter, only to watch it all slip away. "He's destroying everything," she whispered to Sage, who sat beside her on the narrow bed, a protective arm around her shoulders. "Then fight back," Sage said fiercely. "You think you're the first person Harrison Prescott has tried to crush. I've been researching him, June. This man has enemies, people who would love nothing more than to see him brought down a peg." But Juniper shook her head, exhaustion weighing down her limbs like lead. "I can't drag other people into this, and I can't let Ruby pay the price for my choices. So what are you going to do?" Before Juniper could answer, her phone rang. Evander's name flashed on the screen, as it had every day for 3 weeks. As it had every day, she let it go to voicemail. She couldn't bear to hear his voice, couldn't stand the pain she knew she'd find there, because despite everything, despite his promises, his declarations of love, his fury at his father, Evander was still Harrison Prescott's son. He still stood to inherit an empire, still moved in a world where Juniper would always be an outsider. That evening, Juniper made the hardest decision of her life. She called the number on Harrison's business card, "Miss Ellison." His voice was smooth with satisfaction. "I was wondering when you'd come to your senses." "I want to make a deal," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm listening. You leave my grandmother alone, you restore my scholarship, and in return, I disappear from your son's life, permanently." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "I'm afraid the terms have changed, my dear. You had your chance for a generous settlement. Now you'll settle for my mercy. What do you want? A public statement. You'll tell the press that you pursued my son for his money, that you manipulated a grieving young man, and that you deeply regret your mercenary behavior. You'll do this at a press conference I'll arrange, and then you'll return to Georgia and never contact Evander again." The words hit her like physical blows. "Or do you want me to destroy my own reputation to save his?" "I want you to tell the truth as I see it," Harrison replied coldly. "Do we have a deal?" Juniper closed her eyes, thinking of Ruby's house, of her grandmother's trusting smile, of dreams that seemed more impossible with each passing day. "Yes," she whispered, but she hadn't counted on Evander. The press conference was scheduled for Friday afternoon at the Prescott Holdings building. Juniper stood in the marble lobby, surrounded by reporters and cameras, a prepared statement in her trembling hands. Harrison watched from the balcony above, his smile sharp with victory. She had just opened her mouth to begin the destruction of her own character when the lobby doors burst open. Evander strode in like an avenging angel, his hair disheveled, his usually perfect suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. His eyes found hers across the crowded room, and the pain she saw there nearly broke her heart. "Stop!" he commanded, his voice echoing off the marble walls. The reporters turned as one, cameras swiveling toward the heir apparent of the Prescott empire. Harrison's face darkened with rage as he realized his carefully orchestrated plan was about to implode. "Ladies and gentlemen," Evander said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had finally found his purpose. I'm here to tell you the real story." "Evander, don't," Juniper whispered, but he was already moving toward the makeshift podium. "My name is Evander Prescott," he began, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. "And I'm in love with a remarkable woman named Juniper Ellison." The crowd erupted in questions and camera flashes, but Evander pressed on. "For weeks, my father has been trying to destroy this woman because she represents everything he fears: authenticity, integrity, and love that can't be bought or sold. He's used his power to attack her family, her education, her livelihood, all because she chose to love me despite my name, not because of it." Harrison appeared at the top of the stairs, his face a mask of fury. "Evander, you have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Evander replied, his eyes never leaving Juniper's face. "I'm choosing love over legacy. I'm choosing the woman who sees my heart over the empire that would crush it." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded document, holding it up for all to see. "This is my formal resignation from Prescott Holdings, effective immediately. I'm also renouncing my inheritance and my position in this family's business interests." The room exploded in chaos. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed like lightning, and Harrison's roar of rage could be heard even over the din. But Juniper only had eyes for Evander as he walked toward her, his storm-grey eyes bright with tears and determination. "You idiot," she breathed as he reached her. "You beautiful, crazy idiot. You've thrown away everything." "No," he said, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "I've finally found everything that matters. Your father will never forgive you. Then I'll learn to live without his forgiveness. But I can't learn to live without you." Around them, the press conference devolved into pandemonium. Harrison pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with apoplectic rage. Security guards tried to restore order. Reporters screamed questions about the Prescott succession, about corporate stability, about the love story that had just rewritten one of Boston's most powerful families. But in the center of it all, Evander and Juniper held each other like survivors of a hurricane, battered but unbroken. "What happens now?" she asked, the same question that had haunted them from the beginning. "Now we build something new," he said simply. Together. 6 months later, Juniper stood in her first solo art exhibition, watching wealthy Boston socialites admire paintings that captured the raw beauty of Georgia clay roads and the fierce love of grandmothers who raised dreamers. Ruby stood beside her, healthy and proud, her medical bills paid by the surprising success of her granddaughter's art. Evander moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who had found his true calling. His new consulting firm, built on principles of ethical business practices and community investment, was already making waves in the corporate world. "Any regrets?" Juniper asked as they stood together before her largest painting, a stormy sky over familiar red clay titled "When Lightning Strikes." "Only one," Evander replied, pulling her closer. "That I waited so long to find the courage to choose happiness over expectation." Harrison Prescott's empire continued without his son, but it was a colder, lonelier place. And sometimes, late at night in his empty mansion, he wondered if the price of victory could be too high, even for a man who had always believed that winning was everything. But in a small apartment across the city, two people who had dared to love across impossible divides discovered that some battles are worth fighting, some dreams are worth chasing, and some loves are strong enough to change everything. When lightning strikes twice in the same place, it doesn't destroy, it illuminates. And in that light, Juniper and Evander found not just each other, but themselves. The end. If you were Juniper in Chapter 9, facing Harrison Prescott's emotional blackmail, a $100,000 check that would save your grandmother and secure your future, but mean abandoning the love of your life, what would you choose? Would you have had the courage to tear up that check like she did, knowing it could cost you everything you hold dear? Or would you have taken the money to protect your family, even if it meant destroying your heart forever? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.